For those who don't know me, I'm sure most of you do, but I'm Niall McCrae, and my day job is a trade union rep for the Workers of England. And Workers of England was the only trade union that was defending care home workers against a no jab, no job mandate. And we're continually fighting woke inquisitions against employees. Members come to us because the larger traditional unions simply won't help them if they've offended the progressive narrative. Until recently, though, I was a lecturer at King's College London, and I was well used to using PowerPoint slides to work off. I thought, though, tonight Danny would probably tell me off if I did something digital. So instead of PowerPoint slides, I have a pile of books, which I'm going to use as props for my short talk this evening. I was going to ask, because I didn't know who was coming, and I was going to, because the poster actually said, "Are you ready for net zero?" And I thought some greenies might come tonight, because I thought they might think, "Oh, right, this is us getting prepared for the sustainable goals and that sort of thing." So I'm not going to ask the question, hands up if you believe there's a climate crisis. So I'm going to start with my first book. There we go, I'll give you a sneak preview of what the other books that are coming.
It's called geoengineering.
Yep.
Climate crisis.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, well hold on to that. Hold on to that thought. Green Politics. I bought this in a radical left bookshop in King's Cross, and actually inspired me to write my latest book, which is on the climate crisis, or the claimed climate crisis. So, say again, John?
Hardman's.
Yep, that's the one. Yep. Still going. And this book is written about how the original green movement in Germany got started. And the original green movement was very keen to be sort of apolitical and not have any symbols or anything that could be associated with Germany's darker past, with the Third Reich, because a fact that may not be known by many people is that Adolf Hitler was a very keen environmentalist. And in fact, there's a book further down here called Green Tyranny by Rupert Darwall, which is all about how the green movement in Germany was actually kicked off by the National Socialist Party back in the 1930s. They wanted to bring in things that are being talked about now, like a basic universal income and using energy as currency. And also encouraging veganism. So this book, Green Politics, it describes what the original green people in Germany and other countries in Europe, but it really got going in Germany. Germany was the first country in the world for a green party to be elected onto the national government, the Bundestag. But what happened is that the original greenies started to find that more and more people were coming into their movement who were not very keen on nature. They were more keen on Marxism. And of course, communism has a very bad history with conservation. If you look, for example, at the Aral Sea in Russia, which was completely drained for some badly managed irrigation project, and there's now rusting trawlers in the desert. But there's not much concern for the environment in communist China, is there? So Marxists started to infiltrate the movement, and that leads me to my next book, which is, and just before I do that, can I just say, and I'm sure I'm not unique here, I would consider myself to be genuinely green. I used to do nature conservation work. I have a wildflower garden. I grow my own vegetables. I love the Sussex countryside. Don't we all?
Yeah.
Right? So we are preached at by people who are pretending to be concerned about the environment and about nature when they're not really, as James Delingpole wrote about this book, in when was this, 2011, 2012? 2011 this came out. Watermelons. Watermelons meaning green on the outside, red on the inside. So basically Delingpole was carrying on from what was written about the regret of the original true greenies in Germany at how their movement was being taken over. And just to draw one example of a distinction between the genuine Greens and the Marxists who came into the Green movement in Germany, is that the original Greens were very supportive of farming and farmers, whereas the Marxists saw farmers as the original sinners of exploitative capitalism. So, Watermelons by James Delingpole. And this book has stood the test of time very well. Now, there are many books that you can buy. They won't be highly publicized in the mainstream media, but you can go online and you can find dozens and dozens of books that contest the notion of man-made global warming and a climate emergency. Plenty of books written by scientific experts, including Nobel Prize winners, who basically negate everything that's said about this supposed ecological doom. But this book doesn't do that, and nor does mine, as I'll come on to. This is not a scientific treatise because the climate crisis has got nothing to do with science. And it's not a book about nature because the climate crisis has got nothing to do with conservation of nature. Delingpole realized that there was something more at work here, something more about controlling people. He very much associated the Green movement with communism and Marxist ideology. Now, I think he was a bit one-sided with that. I think his perspective was a bit narrow. But what he did do with this book, crucially, was he showed that the climate crisis is not really about science or nature or the progress of humanity, but it's about the stamping boot of authoritarian ideology. And that brings me to another book which has got nothing to do with climate change at all. Has anyone seen this book? No logo? Yes, by Naomi Klein. And very good book, although Naomi Klein I thought was a bit of a letdown on the COVID, wasn't she? But anyway, this book is about how, written in 1999, I believe, around the time of the Occupy anti-capitalist movement. And this is about how global brands were culturally appropriating youth movements. So although these Occupy protesters were against capitalism, they were wearing Nike tops. You know, and this is now completely de rigueur in younger people. I mean, you've got chain shops like Sports Direct that sell what's supposedly sports gear, but it's not. It's just casual gear with branded logos. So all these young people, you know, back in the 70s, they might have been wearing Che Guevara T-shirts, something political, maybe naive perhaps, but at least it was something more meaningful than a Nike. I can't help noticing Simon's logo on his T-shirt as I speak. That's you, that is. So I was going to refer to these young people as advertising dummies, but I better not say that. Right. So young people, very malleable. And on the 13th of July, I'm going up to see a talk. Well, I'm actually one of the speakers too, but the main talk is by Mark Devlin, the DJ. Some of you will know Mark Devlin talks about how pop and rock movements that appear to be organic have actually been controlled all the way along, like punk, hip-hop, totally controlled by the powers that be, with quite deep involvement of the security services. So young people, it's important for any government, any regime that wants to last, wants to endure, to focus on young people and to try and harness them to their program. On to my next book, which is one of mine. It's actually my previous book. It's called Moralitis, a Cultural Virus. And I wrote this when I was working at King's College London, where I was working in an intensely woke atmosphere. And so I was seeing it firsthand. And this book, it was ready to come out on the 1st of March 2020. And, you know, we can look back on COVID now from the comfort of having got through this terrible pandemic, right? We've got through it. Okay, we've survived it. But at the time, it was really quite intensely, even traumatic for everyone, whether you believed it or not. It was traumatic. In fact, if you didn't believe it, it's perhaps more traumatic because of the things that you were expected to do and think, well, what are they going to do to us next? So we delayed publication because anyone bringing out a book talking about people having a mental virus would have been very bad form back then in early March 2020 when everyone was watching Boris Johnson's press conferences every night and looking forward to lockdown. But yeah, this book describes how woke ideology, where it comes from, right? Now, we tend to think that woke and green, and I would put them together like that, we tend to think of these as fairly recent phenomena. But they're not. They have just developed into a particular guise, which is recent, right? We didn't use the word woke until maybe 10 years ago, right? But that doesn't mean that the phenomenon wasn't already there and being built up. We had a phrase, identity politics, that started to creep in around the turn of the millennium, maybe even the 90s. The 60s was known for emancipatory, social, revolutionary movements, feminism, gay rights, black civil rights, and so on. And I'm not suggesting that all those movements are suspect or necessarily wrong in any way. But again, they're not organic. They're not the organic movements that they're presented as. And so woke ideology, where does it come from? It comes from Germany, like everything else, everything totalitarian. I'm sorry if there's any Germans in the room, but it's just this Teutonic kind of anal desire for order, perhaps. I don't know where it is, but international socialism, national socialism. Sorry?
The Institute of Research.
Yeah, Institute of Social Research, founded in 1922 in Frankfurt. And what do we know that as, but we're not supposed to know it as? Cultural Marxism. You're not really supposed to use that term because, now when we brought this book out, there was a website called, I don't know if it's still going, called Vice News. And this book was on sale at a Conservative Party conference, and somebody from Vice News saw it and did an article on it about some really nasty, vile anti-Semitism for sale at the Conservative Party conference, namely this book. And it's funny because Israel, Jews, Judaism, anti-Semitism
So what year was that?
doesn't come in.
Was that?
This was 2020.
The conference then?
So the conference was, now you just reminded me a detail actually. There was an earlier edition of this book that came out in 2018, and it was a 2018 Tory party conference, that was it. It was around the time Suella Braverman had used, I think it was her, one of the Tory ministers anyway, had actually used the term cultural Marxism and got severely reprimanded by The Guardian for doing so and the BBC. So actually, I think this 2020 edition actually does have a sort of footnote explaining that the term cultural Marxism is not anti-Semitic. The reason why they call it anti-Semitic is because all of those professors at the Institute of Social Research were Jews, and they all fled Germany in the 1930s of the Third Reich, many of them ending up in the USA. So woke ideology is just the tip of the arrow, if you like, of cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism sets out to destroy the three F's: faith, flag, and family. National identity, religion, particularly Christian religion, and traditional family values. Flying high on the Delaware Pavilion is the triumphant flag of cultural Marxism, the progress pride flag. And let's make this point very clear about cultural Marxism, is that it's not that gay people shouldn't have rights, black people shouldn't have rights, or there should be equality between the sexes. That's not why they're doing it. They're not doing it to help minority groups. They're doing it to smash traditional society. That's what this is all about, woke ideology. Now, I'm going to explain why I say woke and green are two cheeks of the same arse, as to use a term from, George Galloway. Right, from Moralitas to Brave New World. So we're going back, about 70, we're going back about 80 years. 1934, you say? I think it's 32. I am right, 1932, yeah. Yeah, 1932. So, Aldous Huxley, Brave New World, describes a fully compliant society, comforted by its daily dose of soma. So you see the pharmaceutical industrial complex being used to suppress society. There's no need for state brutality at all, because people are just happily, blissfully ignorant. They have no critical thinking. They don't question anything. There's no controversies. There's plenty of fruit to eat. And another dystopian novel with a kind of similar theme to Brave New World is H.G. Wells' Time Machine, which was written back in 1895. And again, tremendously prophetic piece of work. And I think it takes place in Richmond. But of course it's set way, way, way into the future. Hundreds and hundreds of years into the future. And you have two classes of people. You have the Eloi, the beautiful people, and you have the Morlocks who live underground. And these dystopian novels, like Time Machine, Brave New World, 1984, Fahrenheit 451, they often have people who aren't in the system, who have managed to survive outside the system. Not in any great comfort, albeit, living off-grid, outside the matrix, but there are people who are carrying on humanity in around the time of this dystopian nightmare. But Brave New World is not presented as a nightmare. You could read this book, especially as an idealistic young person. You could read it and think there's lots of good in this world described by Aldous Huxley. There's no violence by the state. There's no need for any violence by the state. But, of course, Brave New World describes a much distant point into the future. Brave New World is often compared with 1984. The question is often asked is, which is most accurate? Well, that's not really a fair question, because Brave New World is hundreds of years ahead, and 1984 is here now. This book here is being used as an instruction manual by governments. You see, to get to the point of Brave New World, you first have to do a lot of totalitarian beating people up. You have to do a lot of smashing skulls to get people to accept their state of total subservience, dependence. What George Orwell's world describes is a technocracy, right? So it's again a prophetic view of a future, a totalitarian society using technology and propaganda to keep people in check. You have the Ministry of Truth, which is rampant disinformation. You have the Ministry of Peace, which ensures perpetual war with Eurasia and East Asia. And are we that far from that now? With the West, Oceania, picking fights with China, East Asia, and Russia, Eurasia. The question is are the Eurasians and the East Asians in on this program? And I think that Julia, in the book, she lets Winston know Winston's job is to continually change the records on official documents. But Julia tells him that there's no war going on. It's all a fake. So the perpetual war is something that serves all three powers. Whether it's real or not doesn't matter, as long as it keeps people in a state of fear and confusion and compliance. The party told people to ignore what they saw with their own eyes and heard with their own ears. That was the final and most essential demand. 2 + 2 = 5. Young people in schools today are being told there's a catastrophic climate crisis. But if they use their eyes and ears, they can't see it or hear it. Global boiling. After, 5 months of continual grey skies. And it's a lot easier to tell people there's a climate crisis when there's no evidence for it with our own eyes and ears than it is if people are actually looking at the temperature and what's going on with the climate for themselves. I've heard people who do thoroughly believe in the climate crisis who say, well, the climate is changing. It's changing dramatically. But where? How? When? And they're never really able to tell you. I'm going to go on to this next book now, Green Tyranny, written by Rupert Darwall, who explains very cogently how many people, what should we call them? normies, NPCs, as in non-playing characters. What should we call them? How shall we smear our fellow citizens that go along with this? Concerned people. Okay. There is a very strong pull for order, for authority, for somebody to tell them what to do. And don't just hear this from me, hear it from a good old-fashioned Marxist, Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, what do people flee from the most? Responsibility. People don't want freedom. They want to be locked down. They want the chips in their wrist. And you'll see it. They'll say, oh no, oh God, no, that'd be going too far for me. 2 years later, yeah. It's like they said about the COVID jabs, isn't it? Oh, I'll take these 2. No, I'm not taking any more. 3 boosters later. Okay, people flee responsibility. And people are ripe to be treated like sheep, like ants. It's easier. People do most things because it's easier. Okay, so what does technocracy actually mean? It's an important word. In a nutshell, it means total control of population and resources through technological means. Right? Now, technocracy actually was devised in the 1920s, and it was a very popular movement in the US and Canada called Technocracy Incorporated. And Elon Musk's grandfather was a leading member of Technocracy Incorporated before the family moved out to South Africa. So, resources, total control of food and energy, right? Bill Gates has got you in his hands. Population. Bill Gates has also got you in his hands. Because control of population means a depopulation agenda. And the depopulation agenda arises from eugenics. And eugenics is the link between the 19th century and what we're doing now. And I'm going to come on to an explanation to finish on how we got from 19th century eugenics to the green movement of today in a few moments. But just one other mention of a book. Somebody has already shouted out cloud seeding, weather modification. It's really happening. And this is a book, came out a couple of years ago. It's a book about climate change. And it's got a chapter talking about the potential to mitigate the effects of this ecological disaster. So it talks about it in fairly benign terms. Has anyone asked us whether we wanted our skies to be clouded over for the first 5 months of the year? Did they ask the farmers? Did they ask any citizens? Did they tell us? Did they inform us? There's no consent, no information, but we can be pretty sure it's happening. And there's been several events in the world, like was it Abu Dhabi? Yes, where Dubai. It's a means of, apparently, of stopping the irreversible increase in global temperature. And Bill Gates has been working on this giant screen, like a big parasol over Earth, to take out to protect us from sunlight. Right, I'm going to finish on my own book, which is called Green in Tooth and Claw. The misanthropic mission of climate alarm. And I'm not going to spend too long on it, partly because many of you have got it already, and you've probably read it. But just a quick whistle-stop tour of what's happened. So I suppose the question is, how did this totalitarian desire become green? Or how did green become totalitarian? Right, whistle-stop tour. The most important book in modern history, Charles Darwin's The Origin of the Species, came about just at the right time for the ruling class, which was starting to get a bit edgy about the massive growth in the working class with the Industrial Revolution, and they really feared the possibility of revolt and ending up like many thousands of people ended up after the French Revolution. So from Charles Darwin's theory came this movement called social Darwinism. And social Darwinism was guided by this idea that society was doing the opposite of the natural process of evolution, because society was facilitating survival of the unfittest. And therefore, we needed to have a big war, 1914 to 1918. No good explanation has ever been given for that conflict, but we do know that it wiped out great swathes of mostly the young male population of France, Britain, Germany, and other countries involved. In the 1920s, two things started, as I've mentioned already. One was Technocracy Incorporated, about developing a global totalitarian system of control, and the other was the Institute of Social Research, Cultural Marxism. And these things can seem completely separate, one largely led by capitalists, the other led by Marxists. But green and woke are completely intertwined. And I would say that cultural Marxism has been used and it's exploited more than ever today by the global capitalists of the likes of the World Economic Forum. Why? Because it works. Young people still love Marxist idealism. They're suckers for it. And it really works as a means of collectivizing youth, getting them all to believe the same thing, getting them all to think of dichotomize into good and bad, and to believe the propaganda about ecological doom and about the need for minorities to be protected from awful, oppressive white Christian heterosexuals and so on. So I'm going to jump forward, though, to the post-war period. Eugenics is about not just controlling the quality of human beings, but controlling the quantity too. And the Georgia Guidestones, which stood in the US until a couple of years ago when it became a little bit too embarrassing and an act of vandalism, they said, it came down. And the Georgia Guidestones was basically a secular version of Moses' 10 Commandments. And one of the commandments was that the population of the world should be held at no more than 500 million. So that's a lot of people to cull. You know, even the COVID jabs are going to struggle to do that. So Julian Huxley's always involved in these things. You see the bloodlines, same people involved all the time. Julian Huxley was the first director of UNESCO, the UN scientific agency, and he said, look, we can't talk about eugenics at the moment after Dr. Mengele and the Nazis and all that. So we have to carry on with the project, but we just have to use different words for a while. And then they came up with the ultimate means of carrying on the eugenics project, which was a climate crisis. Getting people to believe that human beings are a cancer on the earth. Getting children to live in a state of fear about the future, which means, of course, control. Fear always facilitates control. And so, you know, the book explains the trajectory of how by 1968 they got to the point where they can properly launch this climate crisis. 1968 was what I call the anno domini of the green cult. Two very important things happened. Publication of Paul Ehrlich's Population Bomb, which said there was going to be devastating famine, wars and all that, and that billions of people would die by the end of the 1980s. No one ever goes back and challenges these people, do they, about how wrong their predictions are. You know, Al Gore is still flying around in his private jet, isn't he, and living in his beach house without being challenged about the ocean levels rising 20 feet by now. 1968 was also the founding of the Club of Rome. And we know about some of these globalist organizations. Most people know about the World Economic Forum. The mainstream media tries not to talk about them too much, apart from the annual shindig at Davos. But we know about that one. But perhaps the most important global organization of all was the Club of Rome. It's the Club of Rome that basically took over the United Nations and made sure that the United Nations completely changed in its role from keeping peace and harmony in the world, preventing wars, to pushing this climate scam. And it's been doing so ever since. And now we have the UN 17 Sustainable Goals. I like to reword them as 17 methods of depopulation. But that's where we are. And I'll just end by saying we are in the minority. Because most people are not sufficiently interested to reason for themselves about whether there's a climate crisis. They accept the messages that are given. And it's the same fight that, you know, Danny has with the campaign to keep cash, is that most people are not sufficiently critically energized to think about what's happening and where this is leading to. Just my last line really is, when I was at King's College London, a distinction was drawn between conservatives, who are the baddies, and progressives. You know, everything that was been doing with this woke agenda and the green agenda is progressive. And sometimes I'd ask students this, they'd never got a good answer from them, poor things. I'd say, progress, but where to? If you're making progress, don't you need to know the destination? And the destination is in this book, but we can prevent it. The only really uplifting chapter is towards the end, where we talk about all the things that we've been doing. Most people in this room, yellow boards, stand in the park, attending the rallies, keeping cash, giving out the light newspapers, all the things that we've been doing to try and wake people up.
Eastbourne on Saturday.
So we're all doing our bit in this room, and we need to just keep going. We need to persevere. I was hoping to find some new victims for purchasing my book tonight. I think just about everyone in this room has got a copy already. Now, what I'm going to do is, because you're all friends tonight. If you've got, how many months till Christmas? I'm going to do a special offer tonight. Demelza, my daughter, she's a sales girl and she knows about this. I'm going to do buy one, get one free.